All right, everybody. So, bet you didn't think you'd see me again, but as I've mentioned earlier, if you go back a long time ago, it seems like this is the standard format for this channel. I will talk to you guys and come in and talk to you on lunch breaks and breaks. Won't be here a whole lunch break because I have to take my own lunch break. But I wanted to drop in here, finish the discussion from earlier, give you guys a little feedback and commentary on what's going on here. A couple of things to note because I do monitor the chat and see some of the questions being asked, some of the things, and some of the things I can speak to. So first off, I see a few people in there that I want to acknowledge. Georgia Jasper, welcome back. Ice T, I've seen you in there. I haven't got to speak to you. Beta Paris, new mod, welcome to the family. Kristen Vasquez as well. So Bodie, thank you so much for being in there. I see you in there as well, and I really appreciate all you do to keep things clean and keep things going for us. So a few shout outs there. I wanted to say hello, but let's talk about what we just saw on the witness stand, because this is core key evidence that the state is going to rely upon in this case. Now, Wendy's causing them a few problems, which we're going to talk about here in a moment, in regards to trying to get things admitted and trying to get the grandma motion admitted and trying to get some of the emails admitted, because she's trying her best to keep that issue one that's available to the defense, as far as saying who saw what, who was aware of what, was it dad, was it mom? And again, when you have a shared email, especially with that wow email, it's very difficult to know who that is. Now, the state's going to say there's a pattern of evidence to suggest that whenever wow was used, it was Donna. Question will be whether or not that's enough in the judge's eyes to let it in. Um, let me see here. Closed captions before we begin. Unfortunately, I'll see about doing that, Bodie. You're talking about to see closed captions on the. I may not be able to do it today because I have to set the stream up in a certain way to do it. So it may be something that might be not possible today, but I'll see about seeing if I can get that done when I get done here talking to you guys. So that's a big deal. That is a big deal, because the need to be able to admit some of these things is going to be core to the prosecution's case, because the prosecution has a circumstantial case that they need to show. They're relying normally motive. Let's be clear. Number one, motive is not an element of the crime, right? So it is not something that the state is, first of all, required to prove, and it's not something that could, that would prove she did this. It would simply contribute to the jurors being able to understand why, and making it more likely that they would view the evidence in relationship to the elements of the crime in a way that's favorable to the state. So, um, all right, I think I'm back. I apologize, guys. My microphone cut off, so I'm glad I caught that before I spoke too much. Hold on a moment. Hold on here. All right, I should be back, hopefully. There we are. All right, excellent. Sorry about that, guys. For some reason, my microphone cut off. I don't. All right, I think we got it back. I apologize. I think I left the little wireless. Uh, Technical difficulties, guys. I apologize. All right, let's see if we get this thing right. Popped right off the thing. All right. Anyways, I think we got this right. So I apologize for the technical difficulties, but I think I left my transmitter on. I had to get a new one. I have a couple. So I apologize, but that scared the crap out of me. Uh, I should be back here. I believe it should be coming through now. There's a little bit of a delay sometimes. So you guys should be hearing me. Um, but anyways, where was I at? So I was talking about the uh I know, I apologize. Hey, this is live and unfiltered. So there it is. Any question of live, here it is. So here's the deal. So if I remember where I was talking about, um, the I lost my train of thought. So I'll move on to the next thing. If someone wants to remind me of what I was talking about exactly, if I don't catch up to it. But essentially, very nice to see you too, Deanie Cole Holland. Very nice to see you. Good to see you back in chat here. I'm figuring this case is going to bring a lot of people out here. But what we're looking at here, the next phase, the next interesting piece, I think that we have to look at when it comes to Wendy. Oh, I think I was talking about motive. That's what it was. So the way this ties in, because this is very important to tying in, with Wendy and what she's trying to establish here is tying in the dance and the march up to tying Donna into this because they're telling a story with all of this, and you can see that Wendy created some problems, as I was mentioning, and she's creating problems for the prosecution in two ways. One, she's blurring the lines of who's using the email, so she's trying to help and assist in keeping some of those emails out. But two, um, she's also um, doing her best to actually kind of shift things towards her mom because she was asked a questionnaire about Charlie, and this was something that was very unfavorable to mom because she said, "Do you think Charlie cared?" No, it was your mom who was really upset. Yes, she was very upset, and that is absolutely key to the state proving this case because what that demonstrates is that leading up to this, the individual that would have been pushing behind the scenes, in other words, Donna is this individual who has an interest because we know, what do we know? We know Charlie was planning this or attempting to plan uh, the hit on Dan. We know that happened, right? And why do we know that happened? Well, because it happened at all. Because Catherine Magbanua was involved, and Catherine Magbanua's connection is Charlie. So therefore, we know it, right? The issue's always been being able to prove these things and getting the cooperation of everyone involved. What we know is that Catherine Magbanua has said, yes, Charlie approached me, told me about this, and that this happened as far back as I believe it was around November, December of 2013, which actually coincides with exactly the timeline that's being told right now with when all these troubles began and this fight got really toxic between Dan and Wendy. And that it culminates in Dan doing all of these things like filing, basically getting her attorney knocked off the case, alleging fraud, not paying Wendy, sabotaging all sorts of things to demonstrate that this was coming to a crescendo to where Donna Adelson felt like, you know what, there's only one solution. And then you've got Charlie in the background who thinks he's like junior gangster of the year and says, hey, I got the connections to do this, mom. And then they say, do it. And, there's an idea here that, again, I believe personally, right, that part of where this whole extortion thing came in. Uh, oh, that's not good. Let me see here. I just did a check, Bodie. I'm there. Oh, okay. Wait a minute. Bodie confused me there. So Bodie's behind. All right. Excellent. I thought, oh my God, I'm having other technical issues. Anyways, um, because I think that, personally, my opinion is that the Adelsons, that this thing was going back and forth. If you look back in Rivera's testimony, and I want you to go back and look you got to go all the way back to the Magbanua trial, and he's under intensive cross-examination. He gives away that there was 3 trips. There's actually 3 trips to Tallahassee. There was the first trip in June. There was a second trip with a guy named King Charles that Sigfredo took, and then there was the trip where they went, which seemed somewhat chaotic, somewhat, where things were obviously not organized because when this occurs, because what do we have happen? We know that the way the payout goes, and again, this is something that we know happened because it's the way the payout went, that the money wasn't paid up front, it wasn't secured, that Catherine Magbanua still had to collect the money, and then for some reason pays Charlie Adelson's paying $3,000 a month to Catherine Magbanua for an extended period of time. We know all those things happen, but we also know that those things are not normal, and that's what Rashbaum tried to exploit in the Charlie Adelson case. So what that sings to is that I think the Adelsons were on the fence post. What do they want to do here? And then at some point, it occurred. Um, you know, and it goes and it goes through, right? And they do it. The question was when they chose to do it, who knew what and when, but it really doesn't matter because we know, number one, Charlie set this in motion. We know they would have never got to Tallahassee without the interest of the Adelsons in doing this. And we know there was, again, a lot of confusion. This was definitely not a professional situation because none of it screams of that way. It screams like there was a lot of confusion, a lot of back and forth. But we know that but what the prosecution's doing here is they're walking it through and saying everything coincides with a line of escalation. That this legal proceeding escalates to a point to where it seems like Dan Markel is putting them in a legal chokehold and that they've got um and that they've got Dan Markel or that Dan Markel has Wendy Adelson in a legal chokehold and is winning and is causing problems and is showing that he's got the aptitude and can use the law as any good lawyer would be able to do to tie things up, delay things. And the idea here is that she gets so upset. And again, some of these emails do seem to insinuate that she's willing to use extreme measures and then you go, okay, well, what do we know happened, right? We know that Charlie Adelson, I mean, a guy who's living, a very idyllic life, why would he risk that, right? On his own, he wouldn't, right? There's got to be someone driving it. So, of course, Donna's defense is going to be that Wendy and Charlie put this together, that Donna was just really upset, and that Wendy is, again, I thought it was interesting because they pointed out in there, and I think this is something that when Wendy goes on trial, because I think she's going to, I think we were told that today, but when Wendy Adelson goes on trial, they're going to be pointing to the emails where she says, I wanted to be there because I could use my brother's uh, hot tub and house and boat and have this fantastic life. And That's the stuff Donna Adelson's defense is going to exploit. And we're going to talk about that in a minute on how they're going to exploit that and how they can exploit that, and that it will take a jury, you know, willing to overlook the law to get to a guilty verdict. But many juries do that because, again, we have the law, and then we have, when you look at this overall set of facts, and they go, okay, well, they're ultimately triers of fact. They can decide what they want to decide in that jury room. They have the power to do that. And I think in a case like this, with what we're seeing come in, if all of it gets in and can come in, it's going to be a pretty powerful case. It's going to be sitting before them, and you're going to have her defense saying, well, legally, she should be found not guilty, right? Because, and I'm going to explain why that is. A lot of people don't like this, if mistook this for saying, oh, you support Donna Adelson and you support the, no, I don't, right? I support the law, and I support that the law and the process of justice must be followed. And it's exactly the premise that my father held dear and true to his heart, and he won cases based on it. So this is not an impossible case to win, and it's certainly not impossible to think that we don't get to a hung jury. One reason why I stand by that is because of the Magbanua case, the first round, there was a hung jury, right? Now, this case is not a first round case. They've had years to put this together. They're going to come with everything that they got, but at the end of the day, they're going to be standing in the shadow of the law that governs circumstantial evidence-based cases. And that is that you must eliminate any and all reasonable hypothesis of innocence. Okay? So when you have an email, right? Is it possible, if you want to attribute this email to her, if there's a way that you could say, well, Harvey could have done it with this. And what the judge is doing with these emails is he's allowing them to argue the weight of the evidence to the jury, which means it becomes subject to, since this would be circumstantial evidence, that you evaluate the evidence in that way and say, can you eliminate any and all reasonable hypothesis of innocence when you look at this piece of evidence? If not, boom, it's gone, right? And that's how the defense is going to ask the jury to come in. In reality, the situation is that's what the jury is actually supposed to be doing, right? Because they're supposed to be evaluators of evidence. They're supposed to be evaluating the evidence, having the law explained to them, go back to that jury room. They're not in a search for truth. Search for truth was the criminal investigation. Um, you know, the um, that is the premise that trials are supposed to be based upon. They're supposed to be there evaluating what the truth the state says that they have, and they're supposed to be evaluating whether or not, and at the end, if there is a reasonable doubt, a doubt in a reasonable person's mind as to whether or not what the state says is true, then the law requires you find the defendant not guilty. It's not that you're saying they didn't do it. It's not that you're saying they're not guilty. You're just saying that the state doesn't possess the evidence. And that's what the defense is standing on. And that's why they're having a trial. That's why I've heard the comments and everyone say, well, how can you have a trial with evidence like this, or with there's so much evidence? There's other cases out there that are like that. You've got, um, you know, like, for instance, the Ashley Elkins case, which, by the way, I am going to be airing the fourth day of the proceeding. But you got that case, and there's a lot of evidence against this guy, and people are saying, well, can we just move him right to sentencing? No, because he has a right to challenge it, and every person does, and every individual who enters the criminal justice system should have the right to challenge and make the prosecutor um, stand up in court and show what the evidence is. It does not mean that um, it does not mean just because there's a trial happening that there's that a not guilty verdict is going to happen. And the defense attorney's job is not to go get a not guilty verdict. They're just there to ask questions. They're there to ensure, and we should applaud that. And that's what my dad's explanation will always be to everyone is, how do you defend somebody? I'm not defending the person. I'm defending the system. I'm defending our way of life. I'm defending what makes America special, what makes the Constitution special. And I'm making sure that and again, I brought this to my kids' school and everything else, and I taught this to my kids. We don't break the law when we're enforcing the law, right? And if in breaking the law actually is when you're not following something. If someone's rights are violated, if somebody doesn't read them their Miranda rights, if somebody violates, if the police haven't collected evidence properly, if something's not being done, if something's admitted that shouldn't be admitted, we're making sure that all the evidence that comes in is admissible, constitutional, and correct. And most importantly, we're protecting and ensuring the due process rights of every individual that comes in, and the right to confront, the right to ask questions, the right to make sure that the law they're being prosecuted against, that they understood that this law was correct, and that it was in that it was, a law that was clear. And all these things get to be challenged throughout the process that the individual ends up in. And you end up at trial, and a jury looks at it and says, guilty or not guilty, which means they have the evidence or they don't. Either, and there's no doubt about this evidence. And if there's a doubt, boom, it's out. Right? Now, let's see here. Kristen Vasquez asked a question here. After you get done, explain to us what explain to us what the prosecutions are doing. Can you give us your opinion on something that I have put out there? In your opinion, do you think Harvey knew anything? Yes, absolutely. But the question is, do I think they can prove Harvey knew anything? I think he's the hardest one to prove anything against. He's got the lightest evidence. The only way you would ever prove a case against Harvey, in my opinion, is if someone flips. But here's the problem. Once you go down the line like the prosecution's doing right now, Wendy hasn't flipped. Wendy's testifying, but she's not giving the dirt on saying she knew anything. She's just testifying about, emails and things in a generalized fashion, holding out the I don't know anything and never knew anything. And if they did anything, they did it on their own, right? But Harvey is the one is most insolent. But remember, we know a few things, right? We know after the bump, Charlie goes to Daddy Adelson and has a conversation with him, and they have a meeting. So, and at the sushi restaurant. Now, here's the problem with that, and this is why it's the toughest to prosecute Harvey, because Harvey can make a very strong case that he never knew anything till after the fact, because that very meeting could have multiple meanings, and that's the problem. So, unless Donna was willing to step up, Donna's here because of the bump, because the bump was done on her, and they have consciousness of guilt in the way she dealt with the bump, and then of course she's fleeing to Vietnam. But there was, I found it interesting that Georgia was asking Wendy, does your dad follow what your mother does? And she said she actually didn't help dad out there, because she said, well, sort of. He's like a quiet force behind the scenes. So, he's going to always be aware pretty much of what's going on. But yeah, things don't normally go past dad without his approval, which is a way of saying, yeah, dad probably would have known whatever was going on. You know, and that's so. Do I think he knew? Of course. I mean, I think he had to have. Right? There's all this going on. The idea that he didn't know at some point. Now the question is, and not only that, but if there was going to be a situation, like let's think about this for a minute. I believe the original hit was like $250,000, right? We don't know how much money actually, if any money of of mom and dad Adelson went over there. It appears it was all Charlie's because it was stapled, or at least the portion that was given to to Rivera. We never heard Sigfredo testify. Magbanua has claimed all of it was stapled and that she got it out of Charlie's safe. So, now that would indicate that it all came from Charlie. The idea that there would be a large sum of money in the neighborhood of hundreds of thousands of dollars would just be removed from the Adelson fortunes, and that Daddy Adelson wouldn't have known anything about it is ridiculous. So if, I think definitely he had to have had some knowledge of what was going on. My theory in it is that yes, he became aware of this. And this has been my standing theory, that he became aware of it at some point, because here's what here's what I believe happened. I believe that there was multiple times that he went up there. I think he found out because, remember, Sigfredo Garcia called Daddy Adelson's office, call in a drunken voicemail. I believe at that point, Daddy Adelson starts asking questions at some point and says, what in the hell is going on here, guys? And he steps in and kind of says, kill this thing. And I think that was when they tried to back out of it at the very end. And that's when, because again, one of the things that I believe is interesting is that the money wasn't available to be given. It hadn't been secured. We have this $3,000 plan, which indicates that all the money was not paid, and there was some sort of problem or disruption to whatever was going on. Now, part of it might have been also too. I mean, there's also an overriding theory that some of that confusion is that the reason why all the money wasn't paid is because Daddy Adelson became aware of it and thought it was being called off, and Charlie went ahead and let it go forward and said, we're deal with it, and I'll deal with it, and I'll pay you $3,000 a month, and that would explain then why he was giving the $3,000 a month. Um, so you know, um, in my opinion, you know, I think he definitely knew, but I think he thought he was getting this under control, and I think that's why Charlie had to go. Of course, obviously, once it happens, and these gangsters are coming back by, I think that it was kind of known that it was like, okay, Charlie's handling this, and then that's when they had to tell Dad, listen, we've got this approach, we've got this situation. I want you and Mom need to be, you know, watching yourselves here. You know, I don't want this bringing to your doorstep. Um, blah blah, whatever they talked about when they went to the sushi restaurant. Now, so to answer your question, yes. Will they prove it? I don't think he'll ever be charged. I really don't. I think it's the hardest case to make. I think Wendy will be charged, provided that Donna is convicted. If Donna is not convicted, then the rest of the dominoes don't fall. This thing stops right there. So once again, we have a case that is the domino case, right? If it falls, the next one falls. I do believe by the within, you know, a couple of weeks of this conviction occurring, I believe that there will be an indictment handed down. Now, there may be an opportunity given to Donna post conviction to see if she wants to move forward and say something, depending on the direction of how this uh, of how her defense goes, and we'll see what the direction of cross examination goes. Because I think it's actually there's a huge constitutional concern with the way this whole thing is going, and I guess and Judge Everett is handling it well. He's a very good judge. I like Judge Everett. I think he's a really good judge, and I think he's definitely very fair, and I think he handles a great courtroom. And I enjoy watching him. But here's what I think is interesting about what we're about to see with Wendy Adelson, because Wendy or Donna Adelson's attorneys are going to go after her because their only defense here is to make the jury feel like this was something that happened between Charlie and Wendy, because there has to be someone that drove Charlie to do this. Charlie would not have done this without someone involving him. I mean, he's not going to go kill his white or his sister's husband for like his own reasons. So it had to have either been Wendy or Mom, right? Someone was driving this and saying, like, this is going on. Now, we know Charlie was involved. We know the defense. And this is where we're going to get into the idea here that, again, circumstantial evidence law and the instruction that this jury is going to receive is that if any reasonable hypothesis of innocence exists, but when this goes to the jury, then they need to acquit, right? So, what the defense is going to try to do here is they're going to try to raise the idea that this conspiracy was between Wendy and Charlie, okay? Between Wendy and Charlie. And that they're going to say that Wendy and Charlie were the conspirators and that basically this was going on between them. They're going to point to the fact that Charlie interceded and convinced her not to purchase the house, that Charlie was involved, that she referenced the guidance that her brother was helping her with, and that this was Charlie thinking he was big man on campus, that Donna is just this regular old lady who's running a business, who's a bookkeeper at a dentist. Well, she's not, why would she ever think about killing someone, right? That this was Charlie approaching Wendy. I got a solution for you. Wendy getting frustrated. You can already see in the emails that Wendy's off talking. I mean, she calls him an STD. She says he's keeping her prisoner. She's upset. She's mad. Remember, the attacks are becoming personal on her. He's going. The fraud on the court also could have affected her law license, not just her attorneys, because remember, Wendy's a member of the bar as well. So you've got this situation going on here where this is the heart of the defense, that it is reasonable to suggest that it was Wendy and Charlie. Today, what happens on cross? Now, here's the problem that the defense has, right? Because the defense has a major problem. She's going to take the fifth. And what's unheard of is normally when someone takes the fifth, they're not allowed to come in and testify and put evidence before the jury, because guess what? The defense, and this is a major due process concern on Donna Adelson's behalf, that they're remedying and saying, well, she's got immunity, so it's going to nullify part of her right to take the fifth, but then we're going to apply her right to take the fifth to anything outside the immunity agreement. And that's when we're going to get this proffer situation where she's going to go and she's going to get asked questions the defense wants to ask her, and the judge is going to decide what she has to answer or what she doesn't. And she's going to take the fifth outside of the presence of the jury, and they're going to go in with a curated set of cross-examination questions. And then there's going to be some stop and start, because it could be that if she answers things in a certain way when she's before the jury, the defense said, well, she's opening the door. She's doing. This is going to be very interesting, because this is going to be a very novel situation, because most of the time you don't get someone in front of the jury who's taking the fifth and gets to come in and do partial testimony, because they have a right. The defendant has an absolute right to confront this person, and they have an absolute right to put their defense forward. And the judge is getting in the way of that, and the judge is saying, "Well, you can't. And then the question becomes, well, is the jury going to be informed on the questions then? How are they slicing this up? How are they cutting this up? Because normally they say, well, the jury doesn't get told about taking the fifth. The witness just doesn't appear. I'm not sure how Judge Everett's going to do that. It'll be interesting to watch how this goes. Because imagine, right, that they come in there and they say, well, the defense wanted to ask these sets of questions. She took the fifth. Okay. Well, now the jury could look at this in multitude of ways. So you could look at it as, okay, this is just a woman that just is concerned, and she's taking the fifth because, well, on the advice of counsel, and she's relying on her counsel, and it means nothing. Or it could mean that she's part of a conspiracy of all that involves Charlie and Donna and everyone, right? And then, or that there was a conspiracy between her and Charlie. Now, what the defense is going to rely on is, as long as the Charlie and Wendy is a possibility, then under the law, that is the ticket that Donna Adelson has to an acquittal. And the question is whether or not the jury believes that's still a reasonable hypothesis of innocence. And that is what the defense is going to focus on. And how this presentation goes is going to have a huge way of exactly how this jury is going to decide this case. I believe that. I absolutely believe that. I absolutely believe that. So, you know, I don't know. We're going to see what happens. I think it's very, very, very interesting moment that we're going to see. So strap in, because after lunch, when the state stops their or concludes their direct examination, it's going to get fun. It's going to get real fun, and it's going to get really, really interesting. And we're going to get to see exactly how everything's going. You know, and yes, Deanie Cole Holland, she is currently an immigration attorney. It looks like she moved out of the state of Florida finally. But yes, Wendy is an attorney. She's not a criminal attorney. She's an immigration attorney, which is why she, has her own attorney there. Although any good attorney knows that you never represent yourself. You get another attorney in there who can, even if you're a really, really good attorney, you should still have an attorney present for you, because, it's difficult. The emotions that you feel when it's yourself, it's like my wife's a nurse, and she's terrible patient. She doesn't follow what's going on, and attorneys can be the same way. They can be a terrible client if your client is yourself. But this is going to be extremely, extremely interesting. And this is why this case is not as cut and dry as everyone thinks it is. But I think it will be, though, because honestly, I think this jury, I don't know. I'm very hopeful that the jury will take the law seriously. And what I mean by that is the way we will know that they did is if this is not some 2-hour deliberation that goes to guilty. If this is a long deliberation, and by long I mean it memorializes the amount of days. I look at jury deliberations and say, okay, if we have a 7-day trial and you get 7 hours of deliberation, that's a jury that thoughtfully concluded, because they say 1 hour of deliberation for every 8 hours of testimony and 8 hours of trial is really where you say, okay, judges and everyone will start looking at it and say, well, they've really done this, done a good job. Yaklov says, the case is weaker than the case against Charlie, but Donna's attempt to flee is very damning. It is, but it's all circumstantial. Remember, everything is circumstantial in Donna's case. That is where the problem they have is, in Charlie's case, was not circumstantial, because they had direct evidence against Charlie because of Magbanua's ability to testify about what she says Charlie told her, which is why Rash had to come up with the whole extortion plot, which was really silly, right? It was a silly defense. He thought it was a great defense, but the idea there from him was he was relying on the idea that if a reasonable doubt exists, if there's a reasonable hypothesis of innocence, and you're looking at this case and you're saying, can you rule that out? Could you rule out that what we said didn't happen? Because what he was hoping was is a jury was going to hone in on the strangeness of how this thing went down. And I do agree it's very strange. And I do agree that means something is wrong with the clean picture that the state would like to point out. But the state doesn't necessarily need to eliminate all of that. And those things can be there, the strangeness can be there, and you can still find the person guilty. But to me, it speaks to the idea that this thing was going off the rails. Why would the hitman be confronting Charlie Adelson in the middle of the street? That never made sense to me. Why is he calling Dr. Adelson after multiple visits? King Charles is down there. You've got Sigfredo popping up and down there. You've got a problem going on internally. You've got Charlie Adelson in the middle of it. And here's the bottom line, though: the Adelsons, someone, maybe it's Charlie, but Charlie, well, not maybe. Charlie is the one that set this in motion. He got Magbanua involved, so he deserves to be where he's at, 110%. And Donna, the question now at everyone's hand is: a lot of people want to write her off as evil, but the question is, what did she know and what didn't she know? And we have to be prepared to hold the state to their burden, because as much as we want to become, to see people punished for something that we think they did, there's also a requirement, because as soon as we let them do it in this case, as soon as we let the state come through and say, hey, we're going to we're going to go to the jury and we're going to try to inflame the jury and bias the jury by saying we don't have a case that meets the standard, the legal standard here, but what we're asking you to do is just look at this and say, yeah, but don't you think she probably did it? But probably didn't isn't. Suspicion that she did it isn't enough. You've got to eliminate all possible doubt. And the question comes here is there, are they able to do that? Can they prove that Donna Adelson is the one that ordered this thing? And right now we feel like, yeah, she could have. Yeah, she was upset. But what do they have to bridge that gap? And listen, we're waiting. That's what we're here to see, right? So we're not going to make any assumptions because we're waiting for the state to convince us, and we'll see what happens. Because I think the state has a compelling case to put on, and I think it's going to get very interesting. But I also think this is the most difficult case that they've had to put together, and it's going to take some really good lawyering. And believe it or not, regardless of what people want to believe, she's got two very, very, very good lawyers sitting at her table. Okay, they're not some country podunk lawyers. Look, Gelman is a good lawyer. Um, the Donna Adelson's lookalike was a judge, and she was a prosecutor. She's an excellent lawyer. She's a law professor. Okay, they have a high-powered team that are going to sit here and try this case the way it should be tried. She's going to get, and that is what we ask for here. We're not asking for an acquittal. We're not asking for conviction. We're asking for a fair trial where everything gets to come in, and I think we're getting that here because the prosecutors we know are professionals. I mean, they're very good, right? We know the defense is very good. That's all we ask for, and we know that judge is excellent. And I think, look, it's Charlie Adelson actually does have a chance potentially to get his trial, his appeal potentially granted, and that is only because of what Rashbaum did in the conflict of interest that existed that did not come out till after the trial, and the fact that Rashbaum was representing Donna, which is a problem, and there was there's Rashbaum's got himself in a whole rash of mess there. But look, that is only lucky for that. That's nothing Judge Everett did. That's nothing that anyone. That's just the situation. And look, maybe we get another bite. Maybe he gets another bite at the apple. It's going to end in the same result because his defense is ridiculous. Is ridiculous. But Bill Hayes, that might be your opinion on how they are performing for her. but I'm talking about their credentials coming into the case. They're actually well credentialed. Okay. They have a lot of experience. And whether you like what they're doing or you don't like what they're doing, or you feel they're prepared or you don't feel they're prepared. Now, there's a few things that they've done that I feel like I was concerned with. One being in the last pretrial hearing, they didn't raise some issues that should have been raised, and it was concerning for me. But I believe they're competent, and I believe they're putting forth. I mean, the defense they're putting forth, I don't think could be better done or could have been better conceived. Now, maybe again, in the way you feel they're going to perform and you feel what they're, but they're raising the issues, they're objecting the way they're supposed to, they're fighting on every single ground, they're forcing the state to present their case. And you know what? You hate them, so they're doing a good job. The fact that you don't like what they're doing, because some of it is a lack of understanding of of what their strategy is and what they're trying to raise. My concern comes out if I start to see things where where they're not protecting the record. In other words, they're not making the record, but they're doing those things right now. Part of why they want to put the questions up, doing the proffers, putting that out, that is extremely important for the appellate record, and that is extremely important for protecting the record, especially if they get a ruling that doesn't go in their favor. But these are experienced attorneys. They know what they're doing. Now, whether you like their appearance, whether you like how they're dressed, whether you like any of that, I take a different approach to that, boys. I thought our opening statement was actually very good. I thought it was, in terms of when you look at the defense she was putting up, and you look at it from the standpoint of what she was trying to say. She's not coming in. Now I feel like the presentation could have been a little clearer and a little better. I think a better she could have been a there could have been a better order up there. Maybe Gelman is a better order, but the premise of her argument, I understand it and I like the premise of the argument. I think the presentation of the argument wasn't as clean as I would have liked it, because the idea behind it is that what they're trying to say here is listen, this is a circumstantial case, and what you have before you right now is you have a lady who is a who is a grandmother, a mother who was concerned about her daughter. All right, and the prosecution has to prove to you. And again, this is why, in my opinion, and this is where my dad instilled this in me, is you don't go. He never did uh, opening statements where he made promises or he got into what he intended to present. He talked to the jury. It was an opportunity to set the framework of what he wanted the jury to view. And I watched my dad do multiple opening statements in my lifetime, and he set the framework of how he wanted the jury to understand the case from, and he set the tone. And then he said, "Okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to argue to you at the end, because at the end I'm going to argue this, but this is how I want you to remember the case. This is what I want you to look at. This is the lens you need to view this in. And this is my client. He's presumed innocent, and that is what my father would focus on, was the presumption of innocence. And I don't see that a lot. I don't see that a lot of these attorneys that get up and they say things and they promise things and they overpromise. But the premise of what she was talking about, which should have been, in my opinion, to clear up the premise so this jury would understand clearly, is my client is presumed innocent. She's cloaked with the presumption of innocence. And what does that mean? That means that the state has to come in here and prove every single element of this crime. And what the state's going to do is they're going to bring to you circumstantial evidence. And what does that mean? Well, what that means is that they don't have direct evidence of anything that she's done. So what that means for you is your job as a juror, and I want you to pay attention to when I'm questioning witnesses, is I want you to be able to sit here and look at it from this perspective. If 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 there are two reasonable hypotheses left for any piece of evidence, guilt or innocence, if the innocence remains a possibility, then your verdict has to be not guilty, and that's what we're here for. And you talk about the various the framework and what the jury is, et cetera, and then you sit your ass down and you let them get started, right? Um, oh, yacht club, absolutely, absolutely. Um, they will most definitely try this again. I don't think they will stop unless a not guilty stops them. But we'll see what happens. Because I think a hung jury, in my opinion, is probably the best outcome that Donna can expect in this case. I mean, Donna probably doesn't want to hear that. I think Donna's probably. I mean, if you listen to the phone with the jail calls between her and Charlie, they're pretty deluded individuals. I think she's probably thinking to herself, she's going to be going home in a week and a half. I think she's sitting there thinking to herself, that's just going to have to be the way it's going to be. That's going to be the outcome. It's got to go that way. This is just crazy that I'm being charged like this. And she's, I'm sure, believing that her attorneys are going to prevail. But I think that it's going to be an uphill battle. I think, especially with all, with all the evidence that's intended to come in. The idea that you're going to get, I think the best case you have for Donna is that there might be one or two who say to themselves, I'm just not convinced. I'm just not convinced beyond her. I'm taking the judge's instruction serious, and I'm not going to be moved off this. And, so we do have a question here I want to address here from Ice T. First of all, Ice T, I appreciate you always being in chat. Appreciate all of the conversations I see you having out there. How do you feel about Rivera's testimony? Well, here's how I feel about that. I feel like there's more to the story. Rivera is not sharing the full story, okay? Because there are several things that do not make sense with Rivera's story. One of them being that still doesn't make sense is when he talks about his reasoning for not doing the hit on the first trip to Tallahassee, right? And he says, oh, it was because the kids were present. The kids were present the second time. They were there for multiple days. They could have just, the time it went off, Dan took him to the babysitter, went to the gym, and they shot him in his garage. So why could they have done that in June? So something else was cooking and going on at that time. I believe he knew this was going to be, like he says, oh, I thought it was a robbery. I thought it was this, I think he knew what this was. I think he knew what was going on. And I think he's, aware of whatever was going on. So listen, this is a guy who saw an opportunity to get 19 years. Personally, I think he pulled the trigger. I mean, when you look at Sigfredo and you look at the head of the Latin Kings and where he was at, my question is, so why did he get $37,000 and why did he get $2,000 extra? Because he was sitting in the car watching Sigfredo do this? Because he told Sigfredo, I'm not going to do it. You got to do it. Because that doesn't make any damn sense. But he knew he couldn't be the guy to pull the trigger in order to get the 19 years. So it was a self-serving story that he told, which is why there's contradictions and things that don't make sense. But I believe he was the guy that ultimately did it because that's why he was there. He's a criminal at the end of the day, and he was there for a reason. He was there because he was the guy capable and willing to pull the trigger because that was why he was brought in. And I mean, otherwise, why the hell do you have Sigfredo and him driving up both? How does that make any damn sense? But I believe he's the one that walked over, pulled the trigger, done, boom. And I think that he probably at that point knew, whatever was going on at that time. I think he was the one that was probably pushing it because, again, like he said, we're going to extort them, F them. Like they hired us up. We know there's money. We're going to get paid. And the best way for us to make sure that they know that they get paid was to finish this job. And he knew that. And he knew that was going to secure the money. And he was also the guy that everybody's going to be afraid of. So I think that he absolutely, absolutely potentially did. Well, and maybe, ballistics and directions of bullets, to me, I think is, again, it's a science of interpretation. Perhaps it was Sigfredo, but I question. My question is, then what was his purpose? What was his purpose? I mean, they didn't need a getaway car. I mean, Sigfredo could have done this on his own and pulled up, and this guy's getting $37,000 for what? To go sit in a hotel room with Sigfredo and encourage him not to do it if you listen to his story and figure out all the reasons to not do this. So what was the importance of having him along? I mean, perhaps there was both of them walked up on, came up and, I don't know. But I feel like, to me, I think that uh, Rivera was definitely more involved in this than what he led us to believe. And I don't think he's a saint or an individual that should be heralded as any hero here, because if he was a hero, he should have stopped the crime from happening in the first place. He had the opportunity to do it multiple times, and that should stand with everyone. I mean, they got away once, and then he went back down there. And also, well, that's the other thing, George Jasper. Yeah, his story's never checked out on where the gun went. They went and checked it, put divers in the area to go try to find it, and never was found. And that's why I don't know, the ballistics and angle. I mean, listen, it's just like the murder case. The ballistics and angles in that case were all over the place. But if you look deep into that, and you look deep into the science of those things, just like cell phone analysis and ballistics analysis, it's all subjective, and it's all open to interpretation. And there's sometimes things you don't see or ways you see it. And in this case, it really wasn't something that mattered much, because once they got Rivera, it didn't matter. It was like he was willing to be the guy, and he was willing to um, he was willing to tell the story. But I think I think his story about who was involved and what he knew, and or the fact that he probably didn't know the Adelsons at all, is probably true. Do I think he's someone we should say, because he said Donna wasn't involved, to his knowledge? I mean, I don't think he was going to be the one that was going to know she was involved. But what I do think is that it is significant to a degree, because I think that what it tells you is that they're talking about the lady in Charlie, and that's about to become extremely important, because what Rivera does say very clearly is that Wendy wanted this done, and Wendy, it's not mom, it's Wendy. And I think the defense is going to lean heavy into that. And then they're going to lean into the fact that whatever they try to do on cross-examination, that they're going to try to put this on Charlie and Wendy. Now, Charlie's going to come into town. I think the state's going to try to put him on the witness stand. He was on the witness list, but I don't know how they deal with him, because he's going to take the fifth. He has every right to now, because his case is under appeal. And since his appeal hasn't extinguished, he has the right to take the fifth, because of the fact he could be granted a new trial, except for the fact that he's already testified. So he waived that. So actually, he would have had the right to take the fifth, but he testified. So I think he actually already waived that. So he'll be able to come in and testify. But that'll be another fight to see if they actually put him on the stand and what value he would actually bring, if they did allow him to testify. Because again, do they need him? I don't know. I think it would be, to me, you put him on the stand to what? He's going to have to retell I would imagine he's going to have to retell the um, extortion story. Now, if I'm the prosecution and I want to go after Wendy and I want to go after mom, I would be doing everything I could to give Charlie daylight, right? Give him some daylight and see if he would be willing to talk and talk about what actually happened here and come in and testify against them, because that's the ticket to this prosecution, to closing the door especially on Wendy and even the dad. So I don't know, but I have a feeling that I don't think we're ever going to see Charlie do something like that. But that would be the one right there. That's the weakest link. He's facing life in prison. He's got no way out. He's got this appeal opportunity, but really, what's the likelihood that if he takes it back to trial again, what's the likelihood he wins? I think very low. So question becomes, he's the guy, but I'm sure they've already attempted to approach him. I'm sure that's already happened. And obviously, if it was successful, we'd have heard about it. But we know he's on the witness list, so we'll see what happens. Well, except that, yes, he would, except for the fact that, really, like I said, I guess in his mind, he's thinking to himself, hey, I might win again. And I guess, he's going to live in that delusion for a while. But I think if he really was clearly looking at it, is what is the defense he's going to come with? Because if he's coming with that ridiculous stuff about that Magbanua heard him talking about the situation and the joke about the TV, and as she puts together an extortion attempt and goes, oh, yeah, let me go tell Sigfredo about this. And Sigfredo goes, yeah, let me go kill this guy. And what do they do? Go on. How do they find him? How do they get all the information? How do they know where he lives? Okay. It makes no damn sense. It's ridiculous. Which is why Charlie had to have engaged the idea of doing this, provided money, provided an address. That's the other thing that strikes me. Why? We know, I don't know if we know that there was money given on the first trip that was given to Magbanua, it was given to Sigfredo, and they had all exploratory money. All that went away. The second trip was like completely different than the first trip. So why? Why did that? Why would they? You're in the middle of hiring people. So why would Charlie have not said, okay, well, we couldn't do it the first time for whatever the reason? Which that tells me, and that's one of the reasons why I believe this thing started to fall apart, and they started getting cold feet, and things clearly did not turn out the way they thought they were going to turn out. It was a mess. Um, and and again, we know this. The whole outcome of this was a mess because you've got stapled money, you've got $3,000 a month being paid out of business accounts that ultimately traces back to Magbanua and ultimately ends up leading to everybody being charged. You've got just the sloppiness of the rental car and the way they rented the car, and the two killers put them damn selves as contacts on the rental car contract. How stupid is that? This is some of the dumbest things ever. But anyways, my point is, I don't think Charlie's going to have a very good second round either. Okay, and we'll see. And he's kind of stuck because he's already testified, and they can put that testimony back forth. And if he comes up with something else, yeah, exactly. Cell phones being used everywhere. I mean, the whole damn thing is just was screams that this thing got out of control, and it did not go the way anybody thought it was going to go, and it ultimately led to them getting caught. Um, so, um, but yeah, that's how I feel about Rivera's testimony. Um, so that's where we're going to leave it here, though. But guys, remember, most important thing that you should be looking at here, and the most important thing we have to remember as we're walking through this, is that what's about to happen this afternoon is going to be key to the defense, because the conspiracy that the defense needs the jury to see is a conspiracy between Wendy and Charlie, because Charlie doesn't get there alone. So what's going to happen in the next few hours is going to give us a huge, 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 huge idea of how this trial is going to go. And it's going to be very interesting. So I'll leave you with that. And I've got 15 minutes to go eat something and then be ready to rock and roll and watch this thing. So anyways, guys, I appreciate all of you. Bodie, I know that's the craziest thing. I see your comments in it. They aren't uneducated people. And these are supposed to be smart people. I believe Magbanua, yes. Oh yeah, Magbanua will be testifying. She has every right to testify because she'll be talking about. Remember. Thank you for reminding me of this, Yakleb. Magbanua offers potentially one of the most explosive pieces of evidence that could tie Donna Adelson to this thing. Because remember, now they have to establish the conspiracy first to get the hearsay exception that would allow this statement to come in. Because Magbanua would be able to testify to the jury to say that Charlie told her that the money had come from his mom and that his mom had washed the money, not laundered but actually put it in the washing machine and washed it, and that it was still wet. So that's going to be huge. And then, of course, yes, the paychecks, because that's also part of the conscious guilt. So that is going to be a huge point that the defense is going to have to struggle with. And again, it's going to come down to believing Magbanua or not. And again, Magbanua comes with a lot of problems. She lied on the witness stand in her trial. She's going to have to testify again. We saw how weird Rivera's testimony was this time around. But of course, also do understand he's been attempting to try to get his sentence lowered because he's very nervous, because in 2 years he's got to enter the Florida state prison system and serve out the remainder of his sentence. And he's been trying to get the state to reduce the sentence to the federal, which Georgia has said absolutely not. You got a 19-year sentence. No. But he's scared to death that when he goes in there, that he's got people in there waiting on him that are going to take him out. So, that is one of the reasons why I think he was acting the way he was and being a little more evasive. And I think that's also too why he came in and said, y'all won't help me. I'm all right, fine. I'm stuck with 19. Fine. Donna wasn't involved. So, those are little things going on the peripheral, and you see how he acts coming in there. How will Magbanua act? Because remember, Magbanua is still serving life in prison, no parole. So they've got to fight after this trial, after the convictions are secured or not. She'll get whatever she's going to get, because we know she's going to get something. She's going to get released early. We don't know how early or what that's going to look like, but she's going to get released early. So we'll see what happens with that. Anyways, but guys, I'm going to head off here. I appreciate all of you. Appreciate all the mods. Appreciate everybody that's in chat right now supporting the channel. This is what it's about right now, what we're doing. And again, we're watching this trial. We're making sure that even the worst of our society is getting their fair day in court, that they're getting their right to confront the evidence and the witnesses. They're getting their day. They're getting their fair due process. And that is all we can ask. We're not asking for any particular verdict. We're asking for a fair verdict. And that when this verdict comes down, we know that it was fair and everything was done correctly. And I think we're definitely heading on the right track. So appreciate all of you. Appreciate all of your time. Without you, this doesn't happen. So I really appreciate all of you. And you'll be seeing more of me. We'll come on and we'll talk more. Because again, this is the normal standard way. I'm normally here. I'm normally managing things. But I'll have another time, another live that I'll do, and I'll talk about everything that's been going on, because there's been a lot, and I'm actually having to advocate on behalf of my father-in-law right now. I'll be going before helping him with his administrative hearing for his Medicare appeal that we've had to do. Bless my dad who prepared me for the experience we're having right now. So it's been a lot. We've been doing a lot of stuff, a lot of things, fighting a lot of fights and getting a lot of things done. But unfortunately, it's required me to be away from the camera. But I appreciate you guys watching and keeping this thing going for us and just showing up and watching trials here. So appreciate you all. Anyways, with that said, guys, I'm going to throw you back to the courtroom while we await for the fireworks of the afternoon session with Wendy Adelson.